Hi everyone, I'm Devin with California Farm and Garden, and today I'm going to be talking about growing herbs in your home garden. So there are many great herbs that you can grow in your home garden, and for us here in San Diego, we're lucky enough to be growing all year round. That being said, certain herbs do prefer to be grown at certain times of the year. So some herbs prefer to be growing in cooler weather, so for us that's usually November to March or April, while others prefer warmer, sunnier weather. For us that's usually May until October. So some examples of herbs that prefer growing in cooler weather are our cilantro, parsley, dill, chamomile, kind of those softer herbs. And then those that prefer a bit warmer, sunnier weather include your more woody perennial herbs. So those are going to be your thyme, oregano, rosemary, lavender, and sage. Those can kind of come back year after year, though they do prefer to grow in the warmer months. They'll grow better in the warmer months. You also have your alliums or onion-like herbs, including green onion and chives. And then lastly, we have our soft stem but warm loving plants, and those are going to be things like your basil and sapote. Okay, so in general, most plants are going to prefer getting as much sunlight as possible throughout the day. Usually that is 6 or more hours of direct sunlight. So that's sunlight hitting the leaves directly throughout the day. The sun has come out for me. But if your space is a bit shadier, like a balcony, or perhaps you have a tree kind of shading out your growing space, you'll want to focus on those herbs that can tolerate a little bit more shade. So typically that's going to be things like cilantro, parsley, and basil. So I'll be mostly focusing on these for today. So once you've chosen which herbs you want to grow based on the season that you're in and the available sunlight, you're going to want to think about spacing. So if you buy plants from a nursery, they'll usually come with a little tag that will tell you how far apart to plant each of the plants. And you'll want to follow these guidelines because the amount of room that they recommend has not only to do with the amount of space that it's going to need above ground, so the amount of space that it's going to need to grow into its fully mature size, but as well below ground, because usually plants, as much as you see them above ground, is usually how much space they're growing below ground as well. So you'll want to plant at those recommended planting space in order to be sure that there's enough room above and below ground. So if you're working in a garden bed, even though the plants will look really small when you plant them and you want to plant them really close together, definitely follow those recommended spacing for once they're fully grown. So as well, this idea of mirroring space needed above and below ground also applies if you're planting in pots. So you want to choose a pot that will accommodate the root space of your plant once it's fully grown. So for instance, I know this basil is going to grow about 1.5 feet tall and about 1 foot wide. So I'm going to choose a pot that's roughly that same size. If the plant was larger, I would choose a larger pot. If the plant was smaller, like cilantro for instance, I would use a slightly smaller one. Okay, so now that we've chosen our herbs and we've gotten our containers ready with soil, we are ready to plant. So if we're planting from starts, usually what we like to do is kind of give the pot a little bit of a squeeze and just kind of gently remove the plant. You might notice that when you take it out of the pot, you can see that the roots are kind of formed around the outside where the edge of the pot was. So before you plant, you want to kind of just break up this pattern by giving the root ball a little bit of a squeeze. So you're just kind of waking up these roots and encouraging them to grow outward into the soil. So you just kind of do that a little bit. Then you're going to want to dig your hole, and you'll want the hole to be about the size of this root ball. So you just kind of dig a hole. You can use your hand or a trowel, just creating a hole, the right size for the root ball. And then we do recommend using an organic vegetable fertilizer when you're planting. It just kind of gives them a little bit more nutrients in the soil to help them thrive. And then you take your plant, put it in the hole, kind of give it a nice little firm push, kind of cover up the little bit of soil, get it back over, and give it a nice firm planting into the soil. Okay, so after you've planted your new plant, it's important to water it in. So what that is giving it a little bit of extra water the first time to make sure it is fully hydrated and settles well into its new home. So I usually give about 10 seconds or so per new plant, just to ensure that it's evenly moist. Ooh, a bit windy. And after this, you're going to want to water in regular intervals. So that might be every day, that might be every other day. And you're just trying to make sure that the soil stays well hydrated. If not, it could become hydrophobic, and then it's harder to kind of get it back to that point of being evenly moist. Okay, so once our herbs have had some time to grow, usually about a month after planting, we can begin to harvest. So a good rule of thumb is to never take more than a third of the plant at a time, and to wait between harvests in order to let the plant grow back what was harvested. Harvesting too much too often can lead to the plant losing too much energy and ultimately stops growing. So for harvesting, the method partially depends on the plant, which herb we're talking about. So we'll use a couple different methods depending on the type of plant and the way that it grows. So for this basil, it grows in these longer stems. Oh, we have a little pincher bug friend, excuse me. It grows in these longer stems that send off these side shoots where the new leaves will grow from. These are called nodes. So for this one, we're going to harvest by finding where the new growth is coming from, where it looks like kind of a Y or armpits. So for instance, I can kind of see there's a good, I don't know if you can see, there's kind of a good little joint right here where some different side shoots are coming out of. So what we do is once we find those spots, we just kind of come above them. Because the nodes are going to continue to grow those side shoots. So you cut just above and just kind of snip. And now we can use this for our cooking. But this method is not only good for harvesting itself, but we're also encouraging the plant to grow in a certain way, and that is to grow a little bit more bushy. So if you'd like to think about when you're pruning basil and other long stemmed herbs that send off those side shoots, you're kind of pruning from the top down in order to encourage that bushier shape. Okay, so the next method is going to be applied to parsley. Now, parsley typically grows more low, so whereas the basil will kind of grow up, the parsley kind of naturally grows in this mound. So instead of having stems where the new growth comes out of the side nodes, it comes through the center. So this is kind of a small plant, it's a little bit harder to see, but generally when we're talking about harvesting parsley, once it's established, we're usually wanting to skirt the outside of the plant because we want to leave that new growth in the center be to continue to put off new growth. So just kind of taking the outermost stems and leaves of the parsley, again keeping to that third of the plant rule at a time is the best way to harvest this one. Okay, so lastly, I want to talk about harvesting cilantro. So oftentimes when you buy cilantro starts, there are actually several plants in the pot or cell. For instance, you can kind of see here, I can count about 10 to 15 individual plants in this one cell. So while they do grow in the same way parsley does through the center, it would take much too long to skirt each individual plant. So instead, we typically use what is called a cut and come again method. So typically what we do for that is once this is more fully grown, this is still rather young, once it's more fully grown, about a foot, maybe 8 to 8 inches to a foot tall, we kind of grab it from the base, and just about 3 to 4 inches from the soil surface, we go ahead and cut straight across. And it'll feel a little extreme, but trust me, if you do it at the right height, so about 3 to 4 inches above the soil surface, it will, so that's above the center growth of all of those little individual plants, the plant will continue to grow from those and sort of refresh itself into a new bunch. And you can typically get about 2 to 3 harvests from each plant this way before you might want to think about replacing it. So it's a great option for cilantro, alliums, bunching onion, and chives, for instance. Okay, so lastly, just a couple of tips on storing your newly harvested herbs. I recommend keeping them in a cup of water in your fridge, similar to a bouquet of flowers, or else you can keep them wrapped in a damp paper towel in your fridge. I personally love to put them in ice cube trays with a bit of oil, put them in the freezer, and then you can kind of just easily pop them out while cooking. And the last method I'll offer is you can wrap them in a small bundle with some string, hanging them upside down to dry in a cool, dry place until they're fully dehydrated. And then you can break them up and use them as dried herbs while cooking. Okay, so that covers the basics of growing herbs in your home garden. Happy gardening, everyone!